in Santa Cruz, then a master at University of Washington in Seattle, and followed by a PhD at University of Southern California in Los Angeles. In the mid-1997, the University of Auckland took her away from us. She was during the time a postdoc at NASAM's Research Center in the exobiology branch. And she took this new endeavor to go to the Southern Hemisphere on this island and work on and teach paleoecological and paleo-environmental research in the geology department of University of New Zealand. Since then, she has co-supervised 60 postgraduate students and has worked with numerous colleagues from multidisciplinary research projects in New Zealand, but also overseas. She's a member of numerous scientific groups and societies. I don't know all of them, but I mentioned the Society for Sedimentary Geology and the Paleontological Society. She's an associate editor and editorial board member of various journals such as Scientific Reports, Palaios, Geobiology, and Paleontologia Electronica. Current research focuses on marine hydrocarbon seeps and terrestrial hot spring as analog for early life settings in field sites everywhere in the world, such as New Zealand, Patagonia, South Africa, and Western USA. Today she's going to give a talk entitled Extreme Environments, Hydrothermal Settings for Early Life on Earth and Mars. She will examine siliceous hot spring deposits to track the integrity of their fossil preservation through time. This method allows her to follow microbes as they turn to stone and to examine their history far back into the geological record. So please join me in welcoming Kathleen.
Thanks, Fred. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to this talk. I'm actually a native child of the Bay Area. I grew up in Los Altos. Some of my family is here, and it's really great to be back for homecoming. We went to New Zealand in 1997 as a little adventure for 3 years, and I've been there 18 years now. This is what happens in life. And it's just been so exciting to see how the research we've been doing in New Zealand, Patagonia, and elsewhere is really coming to fruition, how we're able to begin to really look at develop models for extreme environment analogs for early life on Earth and potentially life on Mars, and in fact, methane signatures, natural gas signatures even on Europa. I have someone studying with me in New Zealand right now from the Spanish Astrobiology Institute who wants to work on hydrates and hydrate models from New Zealand. So much has come full circle. It's just really terrific to be back here and be able to talk to you a little bit about the work that we've been doing. And I'll try to explain a little bit more for those of you who don't know so much about extreme environments, why they're so useful for a lot of the work we're doing to try to contribute to a better understanding of the evolution of life on Earth and the possibility for life elsewhere. All right, so I know there's a broad range of backgrounds here, and I'm trying to balance the talk between a bit of science and a bit of overview. So we'll just briefly review some big questions about life in the universe, a little bit about the character and preservation of early life. We need to have a signature of early life so we can find it, and what are the links with Mars of the type of work we're doing. And then I'll get into some details about and focusing on the hot springs aspect. These things mineralize. They have minerals coming out of them, which means you might get to preserve extreme life in them, and they're used for analog settings for elsewhere, early life on Earth and Mars. And then a little bit about a project that I was involved with last year in France. I had a sabbatical in France, and finally beginning to work on some of the earliest rocks in the world. So I'll finish with some of that. So a few big general questions, and many people here will be far more expert on this than me. And that is, let's just ask a few big questions. Of course, are we alone in the universe? With all the galaxies that are out there, there's a huge and a hot topic is looking for stars that have Earth-like planets. Other big questions, how did life on Earth originate? What do we know about it? And what was early life like on Earth? So on the left there you can see, and I'm going to use the pointer here so everyone can see, the little white arrow. You can see that these are some microbial fossils, some cyanobacteria or photosynthesizing bacteria from 900 million year old rocks in Australia. And to some of you that might seem like really old, but in fact, when it comes to the evolution of life on Earth, it's not so very old. And you can see how well developed these organisms are and how, in fact, for an expert, how easy they are to identify. But the further you go back in time, the more challenging it becomes to recognize what we call biosignatures in the rocks. And that's a painting from the Smithsonian Institution showing some early life developing out here in this shallow marine area and around hot springs. So the idea that hot springs might have something to do with the evolution of life on Earth is something that is well established. And I'll be talking more about the work we're doing on that. And then, of course, was or is there life on other planets? Where would you look for it? What might it look like, given that we don't really know what the earliest life on Earth looked like, and we only know about life evolving on one planet so far? How do you actually not walk right past it by accident, for example? Or what kind of signature should you be looking for? And lots of people work on this, and it's not an area I work on, but of course, detecting planets around other stars is becoming somewhat more routine. And my number, that's from last year, more than 1,800 so far confirmed. Most, as many of you might know, are rather large, so the Kepler Space Telescope and other techniques are now finding some terrestrial super-Earths and even some smaller planets. And they need to be within a habitable window, within a solar system, within a sun. And those habitable zones, or the Goldilocks zones, change over time, over the evolution of a solar system. So what is continuously habitable zone versus what was habitable when Earth first formed 4.5 billion years ago might have changed slightly. And you can see that Earth and Mars are sitting there well placed within that habitable zone, of course, in our solar system. So these are all very hot topics, big questions that we're asking. And of course, we have the Earth as our natural laboratory to try to understand some of these questions. And then what do habitable planets look like? Measuring planetary atmospheres, noticing the difference in those atmospheres, looking for biosignatures that might be recorded in those atmospheres. There are people here and elsewhere working on those questions. And of course, the question of liquid water or water having been present, at least on Earth, is one of the essential ingredients for life as we know it. So how did life then take hold on Earth more than 3 billion years ago? Geologists use a shorthand for billions of years ago. We use something called gigaannum, or GA. So a lot of my slides will have this little GA, and that means 10 to the 9 years ago, or billions of years ago. So more than 3 billion years ago, people know that we know that the role of early bombardment on Earth, is it positive or negative for life to take hold? Did life take hold many times or only just once? So we had a lot more meteorite impacts on Earth in the past, comet impacts, etc., up until 3.8 billion years ago. And one of the really interesting things that's coming out of the literature right now, particularly in South Africa, is there's more and more evidence for signatures of early impacts being more than we thought, more common than we thought, even back to 3.3 billion years ago when life was already well established. So they're in those interbedded rocks in South Africa, where I have just started working. You have signatures of life. I'll show you pictures of those a little later. We also have much evidence for impacts being relatively common all the way up to that point. And that's important because we need to know how much influence did that have. If Earth was hotter, what kind of setting did life evolve in? Was it dealing with impacts? The answer is probably